In the movies, the Seeing Stones, the Palantíri, are practically an enigma. I mean, we know next to nothing about them, except that Saruman has one, Sauron has another, and Gandalf refuses to use them on the grounds that someone might be looking back. But what if I told you that being watched is the least of the problems? Because while it's indeed dangerous for your enemy to discover your location, there are far greater risks. I mean, do you remember the state Pippin was in after touching one of them?
I see you. Pippin!
That scene alone gives us a good clue that the Palantíri were much more than simple Middle-earth telephones, so to speak. In this video, we're going to investigate the real reasons why Gandalf avoided using them at all costs. Gandalf says during a dialogue with Saruman that not all the Seeing Stones have been located. The movies stop there without giving more details, but Tolkien explains in the books. The Palantíri are a set of 8 Seeing Stones, crafted by the High Elves' artisans, led by Feanor. Of the 8 stones, the Master One remained in the Undying Lands, and the other 7 were given by the Elves to the men of Númenor, the ancestors of Aragorn, so they could communicate over long distances. When Númenor sank, Elendil brought the 7 stones to Middle-earth and placed them in strategic locations such as Minas Tirith, Isengard, which at the time was still controlled by Gondor, and Osgiliath, for example. And here it's worth opening a parenthesis. Throughout the Legendarium, there were elves with gifts that even the Valar regarded with admiration and surprise. 2 clear examples are Feanor himself and his niece Galadriel. Galadriel, even as a child, had the gift of entering other minds, but mind-to-mind communication was a trait of the Ainur, the original spirits, and not of the elves. Her uncle Feanor, on the other hand, created things that even the Valar could not replicate. And I'm not saying here that Feanor was more powerful or talented than Auli, but rather that, like Galadriel, he possessed a talent that wasn't normal for an elf. Something more akin to what you'd expect from a Vala. For example, the Vala Aule created Eingainor, an unbreakable chain forged from an element of nature that he himself fused from 7 different metals. That chain imprisoned Morgoth for more than 3,000 years. The elf Feanor, in turn, created a set of jewels known as the Silmarils, which captured a portion of the divine light of the 2 trees of Valinor. He is also attributed with the creation of the Seeing Stones. His talent lay in creating unique things that no one could replicate, not even beings theoretically superior to him. Quote,
"What are they?" asked Pippin. "The Palantíri of the kings of old," answered Gandalf. "Then it was not made, Pippin hesitated. "By the enemy?" "No," said Gandalf, "nor by Saruman. It is beyond his art, and beyond Sauron's too. Feanor himself, maybe, wrought them."
Now that we know the origin of these stones, let's move forward. The Seeing Stones had different sizes and degrees of power. The Palantír of Osgiliath, for example, Tolkien describes as so large that a grown man couldn't carry it alone. The so-called Palantír of Elendil, positioned in a tower near the Shire, was the only one capable of communicating with the Master Palantír that had remained in the Undying Lands. The key detail here is that the Palantír of Elendil only communicated with the Master Stone. It didn't connect with the other stones in Middle-earth. But going back to the scene where Gandalf tells Saruman that not all the stones had been found, he was absolutely right. At that time, only 3 of the 7 had known locations. The one right in front of them in Isengard, one in Minas Tirith, and the Palantír of Elendil, which had been guarded by Círdan, the same elven shipwright who would later give Gandalf the Ring of Fire. The stones of Osgiliath, Weathertop, Anuminus, and Minas Ithil had been lost. For 3 of them, the most likely scenario is that they were swallowed by the sea forever. However, regarding the Palantir that was in Minas Ithil, Gandalf was almost absolutely certain that it had fallen into Sauron's hands. And I'll explain why he thought that. You know that fortress, the Witch King's Green Tower, which we know as Minas Morgul? In the past, it was a fortress city very similar to Minas Tirith, and it was called Minas Ithil. Its function was to watch over Mordor. It had been built on the eastern border precisely to monitor the region, and that's why a Palantir was kept there in case something happened, and there was a need to warn the rest of the kingdom. However, the Witch King conquered that fortress and renamed it Minas Morgul. When he took the fortress, he found the Palantir and took it to his master, Sauron. So, Gandalf not only knew that someone might be looking back, he was almost certain that someone was Sauron himself. But now we're getting to the main part of the video, to understand what was truly the source of Gandalf's fear regarding the Seeing Stones. What Gandalf truly feared was the projection of power that these artifacts allowed. The stones worked almost like a dimensional window, so to speak. It wasn't just about being seen, it was about being dominated. And we have several examples of this. Aragorn, Pippin, Denethor, and even Saruman. Let's start with Denethor, the father of Boromir and steward of Gondor. He began using the Palantir of Minas Tirith secretly in an attempt to anticipate the enemy's attack. He wanted to know when it would happen and not be caught off guard. However, even from afar, Sauron projected his power and consumed Denethor's mind and sanity. Quote,
"Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the Palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only 2 aged hands withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men."
Also consider Aragorn's account after using the Seeing Stone against Sauron. Quote from The Return of the King.
For some time, Aragorn sat silent at the table in the hall, and the others waited for him to speak. "Come," said Legolas at last. "What has happened since we came back to this grim place in the grey morning?" "A struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the Battle of the Hornburg," answered Aragorn. "I have looked in the Stone of Orthanc, my friends." "You have looked in that accursed stone of wizardry?" exclaimed Gimli, with fear and astonishment in his face.
Although Aragorn was exhausted, as you saw, he managed to get through that experience because of his strength of will, and mainly because he was the rightful heir of Elendil, the man who brought these stones to Middle-earth in the first place. But the others weren't so lucky. Pippin, for example, was mentally shattered after looking into the stone for just a few seconds. It took Gandalf bringing him back to sanity with a word of power. Quote,
Gandalf knelt by Pippin's body. The hobbit was lying on his back, rigid, with unseeing eyes staring up at the sky. "The devilry! What mischief has he done? To himself and to all of us." The wizard's face was drawn and haggard. The hobbit shuddered. His eyes closed. He cried out and sat up, staring in bewilderment at all the faces round him, pale in the moonlight. "It is not for you, Saruman!" he cried in a shrill and toneless voice, shrinking away from Gandalf.
"Peregrine Took," he said. "Come back."
The hobbit relaxed and fell back, clinging to the wizard's hand. "Gandalf!" he cried. "Gandalf, forgive me."
And finally, let's get to Saruman. Even though he was a Maya with a spirit on the same stature as Sauron, he was still subjugated. Here's what Gandalf says.
Saruman was trapped and held, and however since he has been persuaded from afar, and daunted when persuasion would not serve. If any, save a will of adamant now looks into it, it will bear his mind and sight swiftly thither. And how it draws one to itself. Have I not felt it? Even now my heart desires to test my will upon it.
In the end, as with everything he touched, Sauron turned the seeing stones from something useful into something deadly, capable of attracting and destroying even well-intentioned people. The good side of this story is that when the ring was destroyed and Sauron defeated, the seeing stones were purified, and King Aragorn decreed that the remaining Palantíri be returned to their rightful places.
And that brings us to the end of another video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Take care, and see you in the next one.